Do you get enough sleep? I know I don't get enough sleep. Hi, I'm Roop, and you're watching TC San. If there is one thing I struggle with on a regular basis, it's winding down for the night after a long day. I cannot sleep early, especially since the pandemic started and the child is schooling from home. Our routines have changed, and I'm extremely possessive about my me time after the child goes to sleep. I need those quiet night hours to finish my work, to unwind, read, watch my shows, have my hot cup of milk, all without distractions. And that progresses into the late hours of the night. Or should I say early hours of the morning? I know I'm not alone. I have a few friends who have the same routine as me, but something's gotta give. It's not healthy. Adults need at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and teenagers need up to 10 hours for their body to function at its best. According to Public Health Agency of Canada, 1 in 2 adults have trouble going to sleep or staying asleep. 1 in 5 adults do not find their sleep refreshing. 1 in 3 adults have difficulty staying awake during waking hours. And that probably has gotten worse since the pandemic. This is why I invited Dr. Kirti Brar, who's a family physician in Edmonton, to talk to us about sleep. Why is sleep needed? How much sleep is needed? And what happens to our body, short term and long term, if we don't get that sleep? And she will also give us tips and techniques that can be implemented to promote consistent, uninterrupted sleep. Let's welcome Dr. Kirti Brar. Hi, Kirti.
Hi, Roop.
Thank you so much for making the time to be here today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk sleep. So, why is sleep important?
Yeah, I think we often forget about sleep when we think about a healthy life and a healthy lifestyle, but it's one of the cornerstones of what keeps us going. Alongside of eating right, exercising, sleep should be truly the next thing that comes to mind, but it's often the poor, neglected child of all the things that we don't think about. So as humans, we actually spend probably 1/3 of our life asleep. So that's usually about 7 to 8 hours a night for most people. But sleep has a lot of different purposes, but they're all theoretical. We don't exactly know what sleep actually does. So the theory is that sleep is meant to be restorative, it's meant to help conserve our energy, and it helps with memory consolidation. So what happens when we sleep is that the sleep actually helps with housekeeping of the brain. It helps to clear out the toxins while we're asleep. When we're in deep sleep, our body actually repairs and revitalizes itself. There's growth hormones that are secreted during that time that help with muscle growth and muscle repair. The immune system actually gets activated as well while we're sleeping. Our alertness gets restored, and we're able to start performing at our peak performance levels with good sleep. Then there's also a sleep mode called REM sleep, or REM sleep, which is associated with rapid eye movements. And people may dream in this state of sleep as well. And this state of sleep is thought to be related with memory consolidation and learning, to clear up neural networks or pathways in the brain that we no longer use and solidify the connections that we're building and learning from. So sleep has a huge role in being able to learn new information and create memories and solidify them over time.
How much sleep do children need or teenagers need?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the answer is not exactly a true numerical amount. It all depends. Everyone has a different threshold for what might be sort of their normal or where they might feel refreshed. Because it's not just the quantity of sleep that matters, it's also the quality of sleep that a person might be getting. Our structure of sleep architecture changes from infancy into adulthood and as we get older as well. So it's not the same amount per se that's needed. So between infancy, looks like we need usually around 14 to 17 hours. And that amount gradually starts to come down where as school-age children and into their 6 to 12 years, they're needing usually around 9 to 11 hours. And then most adults will need around 7 to 9 hours. And then as you get older, that kind of number stays the same.
When you say 7 to 9, there are some adults that would need 9 hours sleep, and there are some adults that would need 7 hours sleep. So, what is the factor that differentiates these people? Like, who are these
So
lucky ones who need lesser amount of sleep, and who are the unlucky ones right here who need at least 9 hours sleep?
yeah, so I guess part of it just comes down to the quality of sleep we're also getting. So sleep again has the two components where it's the quantity, where it's a number of hours, and then there's the quality of sleep as well. There are some people who there's a theory that have some genetic links to just requiring a lot less sleep and feeling refreshed. So I think you can thank perhaps your ancestors, your mom and dad, for the amount of sleep or the way you're sleeping. But in general, there's a lot of known and unknown habits that might be affecting the quality of your sleep, and perhaps that it's just not as restorative. And so when you're waking up, maybe you're not feeling as refreshed as you would if maybe you adopted some of these other things that we'll talk about maybe when we talk about sleep hygiene.
So I was watching this TED talk, and they talked about what happens when you don't sleep. And there was a teenager in 1960s in the US somewhere who did this experiment. He stayed up for a very long time. I don't know the exact numbers. He stayed up for, I think, over 3 4 days, and he they followed his physical symptoms, and he started losing his mental uh, balance, and he started losing his vision. He started hallucinating by the end of the third or fourth day, or by the end of the time period that he didn't sleep. He was completely out of it. So, what happens to your body when you don't sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's probably not a typical setting. That is a one off case. And probably what's happening in our society today is that there's a combination of chronic sleep insufficiency, meaning that we're just not getting ourselves to bed. There's always something better to do, there's always something more entertaining or enjoyable to do. Or for some people, just socioeconomic wise, there's some work to do, there's kids' stuff that needs to be taken care of. So there's always reasons to put your health, your sleep lower on the rung of things compared to other things that take precedence. So in our society, what we're most likely seeing are consequences of insomnia, which is a sleep difficulty, trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, or on the other side, chronic sleep insufficiency, meaning people just not sleeping enough. So what happens when we don't sleep? Well, there's the short term of it, and then there's the long term over time, what happens to us as we don't get ourselves to bed or are having trouble because of insomnia. So in the short term, not having sleep can lead to obviously being less productive. We're not as efficient when we wake up the next day and not having slept enough. We may feel unmotivated, we're just too tired. So that may interfere with our ability to want to exercise or want to meal plan because you just don't have that drive in you the next morning. Often you might feel a little bit irritable, a little bit more anxious possibly. So that can affect your mood and overall state of well-being. In addition to that, not sleeping enough can impact, as you know, as you mentioned, the cognitive side of things, is that you're just not thinking as clearly as you did always. Now, one of the most important points of this also is that there's increased risk of motor vehicle accidents and car crashes that result from people being drowsy, not having had slept enough. So these are all factors that we have to take into account that do affect our day-to-day life. And then when you look at the long term of it, it's even a little bit more scary than that. So with not having enough sleep, we're at a risk of heart disease. So things like heart attacks, high blood pressure. Not having enough sleep affects our metabolism, so we're at a higher risk of developing obesity, diabetes, and also we can fall into a depression as a result of chronically not having enough sleep. So it affects mental health, just like mental health affects sleep as well. So with regards to the heart disease, there was a study that was done in the UK with about 500,000 people that followed people in the age group between 40 and 69. And initially, they had no heart disease to begin with. And these people slept about less than 6 hours every single day. And over the course of when they were followed, they were found to be 20% more increase in people who slept less in heart attacks. So that is a huge number. So it is not something that we can take lightly over time. Then there's also a connection with possible immune system consequences. So there was another interesting study that was done where sleep was restricted for people for less than 6 hours a day, and then they were in that state for about 6 days before they got their influenza immunization. And so these people actually mounted less of an immune response to the vaccination. So it implicates, again, the immune system needs sleep to function at its best ability. So that, and then the final thing, like I mentioned, obesity and diabetes side of things. So what happens is our hormones that help regulate how hungry we are or how full we feel also get thrown off when we don't get enough sleep. So you may find yourself reaching for more unhealthy choices of food, craving junk food a little bit more, and underneath all of that, the body is more likely then also to develop diabetes. So it's a double whammy there for a few different reasons. But on the
I'm
other
going to
hand,
bed at 9 p.m. tonight.
yeah, I scared you good on that one. But on the flip side, sleeping too much also has an association, and there's a link between obesity, depression, heart disease, and even death. So it's not that we want too much sleep, or we just have to find the right moderation where it's not too little and it's not too much.
7 to 9 hours. That's the magic number. Can you catch up on sleep? Let's say you didn't sleep you only slept 5 hours a night during the weekdays. Can you catch up on sleep on the weekend?
Yeah. So over time, your body does develop a sleep debt if you have not caught enough sleep. And so what happens is the body accommodates for this sleep debt in the form of changing the sleep architecture so that non-REM sleep and the REM sleep structure might change to accommodate you to feel a little bit more rested. Likely, though, if on a day-to-day basis, every single day of the week, 5 days a week, where you're not sleeping enough and you try to catch up on your sleep for that one day, again, it's that too little and then excess, right? So there's probably not too many studies out there that I'm aware of, at least, where there's a direct link if it's all equivalent. If we don't sleep and then sleep a bunch, if it kind of all matches out, it'd be nice if it did. But I think what happens is you probably catch up to some level of that sleep that you've created. But as you know, over time, not having enough sleep, I don't think it's hard. It's very easy to regain some of those deficits that you kind of put your body through. So I don't think it evens it out completely. But yes, you can catch up on sleep, especially if it's done in the short term and not on a chronic ongoing basis.
And you touched briefly on the REM cycle of sleep, but how many hours into the sleep is the REM cycle, or how many hours do we remain in the REM cycle?
So non-REM sleep and REM sleep there's different stages within the non-REM sleep. The non-REM sleep usually happens in the first part of the night, and REM sleeps tend to happen every 90 minutes during the sleep cycle. And every time it progressively probably gets a little bit longer with each subsequent cycle. So in theory, a person only sleeping the first part of the night or perhaps not sleeping enough maybe did not hit enough of the REM cycles throughout the sleep cycle. So if you're sleeping and the REM cycle comes about every 90 minutes, every time the REM cycle gets a little bit longer, and every time there's probably a little bit more of that restorative component. But remember, a lot of this is theoretical stuff. So we don't know exactly, we have some theories around it. So we think that concentration, memory, and things like that are improved in the REM state, but it's not an exact absolute knowledge that sleeping more in the REM is much, much better, or sleeping in the non-REM is not. We need a balance and moderation of probably all the sleep stages. And at different stages in life, people will have more deep sleep, more REM state, and so on. So for example, in newborns, we know a large chunk of their sleep is REM sleep. And the reason for that, again, is that we think that it is they're still developing a lot of their neuronal collections. The brain is developing fast, so they need more of that. So yeah, ideally, later on in your sleep cycle is where you're most likely going to have the longest amount of REM sleeps.
Interesting. And we were taught early to bed, early to rise. And but there are two kinds of people in this world. I can't remember the book I was reading, but there is a book about this, that there's two kinds of people in this world, owls and larks. And this world is made for larks. Larks are people who wake up early in the morning, and owls are people who stay up late in the night. But is there any difference between sleeping during the day or sleeping during the night?
That's a good question. I would have to theorize about that, but essentially, the circadian rhythm is sort of set in a certain way, and it responds to external cues like light outside. So imagine if you're talking about a shift worker, and that person is sleeping always in the daytime and working over the night, but they're doing it in a setting where there's blackout curtains, it's completely dark. And they do it sort of on a long-term basis, and their light stimulus is coming from the external artificial lights at nighttime. I suppose then that for that person that there's probably not a big difference. But for a person who's sort of staying awake one night and then up during the day and then is doing different things through the week, I would imagine that that would have an effect in your routine. It would have an effect in when certain hormones are secreted in your brain to make you sleepy or not. Because typically we were designed at dawn to have this drop in sort of our sleepy hormones, and at dusk then to get ready and have that final burst of energy and then get ready for bed. So if we take away those external light cues, then you have to kind of depend more on these artificial cues to kind of get to bed. So I think there would be a difference in the quality of sleep, in that it would be affected if you're going frequently, always between day and night.
Okay, so it's best to sleep at night. Best to
Yeah,
sleep at 9 p.m.
the time kind of varies for everybody, but the more sleepy period for us in our brains, because of the neurochemistry, is typically between 12 to 4 a.m. and then again 2 to 4 a.m. is typically the time where we get most sleepy. And so when we fight that initial sleep, we can kind of get ourselves into a state of arousal temporarily, and then compromise the quality of our sleep. So if a person is a bit of a night owl, for example, then it could mean that they could, to be healthy long term, possibly just get to bed, but within their upper limits of normal, and not necessarily pushing the boundaries of the human mind.
Lots of threats in today's conversation. I'm not letting my husband listen to this. No, Pavan, you're not watching Prince off. This is of no value to you whatsoever. No value addition to your life.
Yeah.
Turn this off.
This is useless.
All right. So now that we've established that sleep is crucial for mental health, for our physical health, for our long-term health as well, let's talk about sleep hygiene. For most of us have heard about it. Dental hygiene, sleep hygiene before going to sleep every night. It's very important. But what is sleep hygiene?
So sleep hygiene just includes some behaviors and that lead to a better quality of sleep. These are some habits that we can pick up and develop to make sure that we don't compromise the quality of our sleep, and then that we're getting our bang for our buck for how many hours that we do going into bed. So some of the habits that are talked about when it comes to sleep hygiene, I'll highlight those for you then. So the first and foremost, like we talked about, routine is really important, and getting into a regular sleep schedule then becomes very important. So going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. And like I said, if you're a bit of a night owl, then you push that a little bit more. And then if you like to wake up early, then you kind of play around with it. But for you, the times at least should be consistent. And that's probably the key there. For other factors to consider, look at your daily consumption of substances or medications, because they can play a role also in the quality of sleep. So, for example, for some people, for most people actually, avoiding caffeine at least after lunchtime will be very important. For some people, like I said, the caffeine can last into the system more than 24 hours. So they may have to have a cutoff way earlier even. For some people, they're just not able to tolerate caffeine at all. So everyone's slightly different. But in general, the rule is to avoid caffeine after lunch. The other substance that kind of affects sleep also can be smoking, particularly smoking in the evening will affect your quality of sleep. Then sometimes people do start to self-medicate to try and manage their sleep difficulties or their insomnia. And sometimes they'll use over-the-counter products, or sometimes they'll use alcohol to try and initiate that sleep. But overall, long-term, these substances interfere with getting that restorative, restful sleep and changes the sleep architecture too. So they're not usually the best. And it's best to avoid alcohol as well closer to bedtime. And if you are struggling with alcohol consumption or overconsumption, you think you have a problem, it's important to maybe bring that up with your physician as well.
But sorry to interrupt, but alcohol, it makes you drowsy. It puts you to sleep, does it not?
Correct. So alcohol can be a depressant initially. So it does make you sleepy in the beginning, but then it disrupts the quality of your sleep later on at night. So there's a chance that later on you're not sleeping as deeply as you would otherwise. So you may fall asleep. And that's why there's a tendency in people who are self-medicating, because they'll turn to alcohol because initially it helps to fall asleep. But then over time, what will happen is it starts to affect their mood, it starts to affect anxiety levels, and it disrupts your ability to have a good restorative sleep in the long term overnight. So you probably may not notice this if you're not afflicted with sort of alcohol dependence syndrome, but over time, these things can really add up and affect a person's well-being.
And what about melatonin? I know a few people who take melatonin.
Yeah, melatonin is one of the natural hormones that the brain kind of reacts to with regards to sleep cycles. So melatonin has some evidence in helping people maybe decrease sleep latency or the amount of time it takes for them to fall asleep. There's not particularly a harm associated with it, but now we're getting into the category of taking things to help you get to sleep. Right? And it's taking away from sort of the habits and the non-medication side of things to naturally allow you to have a good sleep cycle. Because often the answer is not medications. It's very seldom that sleep medications are what's required long-term to allow a person to stay healthy and feel well. Medications typically work best in the short term, when there's a known sort of beginning and end. So for example, a stressful situation, excuse me, or a difficult time where there might be increasing sense of loss, for example, or grief for whatever reason. For people who are night after night having difficulty falling asleep, then there are medications that can help take away that distress, because it can be quite distressing for people. There are people who may not sleep for nights in a row. So sometimes to disrupt that cycle in the short term, the medications are important. But when we're looking at, I guess, treatments, it's more effective to look at treatments in the sense of cognitive behavioral therapy or relaxation exercises. And I can speak to that more if you like.
Yeah, no, I think everyone needs to go talk to their doctor if sleep is a problem consistently like that. So if it's one off night here and there,
Right.
I think that's different. But if it is consistently a problem that you are unable to sleep or unable to stay sleeping or don't have a restorative sleep, you don't feel energized in the morning when you wake up, I think it's important to speak to a health professional, a doctor, and everyone's reasons behind why they're unable to sleep, I think they're going to differ. And that would only come out in a consultation with a professional.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So now that you've scared me enough, I think I'm going to try to sleep at 9 p.m. And there are a couple other things. I don't know if you mentioned them. Turning off your devices, turning off your phones. That is becoming a huge problem these days, especially with young kids. They're taking their phones into bed, taking their tablets into bed. We're waking up in the morning. The first thing we look around for is our phone. It's right at my bedside. Like that's it's ridiculous. Every morning, like my eyes are barely even open, and I'm looking for my phone.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for my husband in bed. I'm not looking for my kid if she's okay. I'm looking for my phone. and, and my kid always jokes around. She's like, "Mom, if someone try to kidnap me and steal your phone at the same time, you'll save your phone and you let me go," which
You
is sad.
she brings up a good point. There is such a thing. We joke about it because obviously you're affected by it, but you're not suffering as a result. But there are people who are absolutely addicted to their phone. Phone addiction, screen addiction is real. Where people at nighttime, in their middle of the sleep, even might be unconsciously reaching out and trying to grab their phone in their sleep. This is a problem. So I agree, absolutely. And so part of this sleep hygiene requires ideally avoiding looking at any screens, including televisions, smartphones, laptops, tablets, basically any number of screens that we have lined up before us before bedtime is supposed to happen. The light from this screen it can make it harder for us to fall asleep. And so typically the recommendation is 2 hours before bed to avoid getting in front of screens like that. The other things are when you do wake up in the night and all of a sudden you cannot fall asleep, avoid looking at the time. Avoid looking at things that remind you and make you more anxious that, oh, hey, I haven't quite slept yet, because that can lead to sleep anxiety. We mentioned this in passing too, but keeping the room quiet and dark and cold can help as well with sleep initiation. Noise machines can kind of create a habit of requiring that background noise to kind of help you calm and get into a routine. And again, eye masks or blackout curtains can be used to kind of facilitate that better environment. And then the last couple of things that we should mention is probably just meals before bedtime. So eating a very, very large meal right before bedtime can also cause a problem in terms of not allowing you to fall asleep properly, but also being hungry will do the same thing. So try to eat a healthy but filling meal, but that doesn't kind of make you feel overfull. And avoid late night snacks, particularly sugary items. That happens after dinner. And a lot of the times, I know, especially with COVID, a lot of my patients have been coming back and saying, hey, this is what's been happening. I need something at the end of the day. And again, this is the culture we've generated, is that this is my break. And break for some people equals wine. It may equal ice cream. It may equal chocolate. And so for this temporary short-term impulse that we give into because we're probably overtired and we're overwhelmed and overworked or anxious or stressed, we treat our emotions with these treats that can take the form of any of those things that we mentioned. And so in the long term, we're compromising consistently the right thing to do for that impulse in the short term that actually makes us feel a lot worse in the global scheme of things.
I'm
So
doing
those
everything wrong in life. I- I'm doing everything wrong in life.
yeah, it's best to keep this talk from Pavan then,
Yeah.
right?
He is so good with sleep. He meditates before he goes to bed. He turns the lights off and half an hour before going into bed. So he'll sit there, he'll meditate, and then he's in bed. And then he tells me not to disturb him. Even if I come into bed later or if I turn any lights on, he'd be really upset if I do that, because he is very particular about his sleep quality.
Yeah.
And it has to consistently happen at the same time. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's intriguing why I do not get inspired.
There's something about being told something, when you're told
And
to do
then you don't
something,
do
you're a
it.
lot less likely to do it.
Exactly. Emily,
But
thank
everyone,
you so much for all the information, all the well-researched information you always bring forth. And I'll talk to you next month with another topic.
all right, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.